Hey, we're going to talk about a word that is changed over the years, that changes the viewpoint of what Native Americans look like. And then we're going to jump into the culture and get into where we're headed, basically, with this Southeastern culture. Now, we're going to talk about a word real quick called savage. And the word today means something totally different, and even some people might even give it as a compliment, like that's savage. But words in the English language are kind of funny in a lot of ways because over a long period of time, it's changed its meaning, or even today's youth will take common words and make another meaning for it. But it's actually a French word, and it means uncorrupt or something that's innate goodness. So if you were to go to an island and you find all these people that have never been had any kind of outside influence, and you jumped on this island, they would be the noble savages. They are uncorrupt. They are untouched, and that's what savage actually means. It's a French word, and you first hear about it about a story about a Christian prince that disguised himself as a Spanish Muslim, and he goes in and he's nature's gentleman. He distills as the ideal picture, and or in 1851 when Charles Dickens wrote The Noble Savage that achieves prominence. It's a very common word that actually is it's a compliment, and we're going to talk about how that changes over a long period of time. Now, when the Puritans settled in Massachusetts near Boston, they started really building up Boston and the areas around it, and they started pushing inland. And the further they started pushing inland, they got into the lands of the Wampanoag tribe. There's your word for you right there. The chief of the Wampanoags was a guy by the name of Metacom. And Metacom was nicknamed by the Puritans as King Philip. Um, so as these settlers would start moving inland, they would come across the Wampanoag lands and they would create a fight. Now let's stop for a second, real quick, before we go any further, and let's talk about what is the rules of engagement. Let's imagine this: you are in your bedroom. What's the safest place that you probably go to? If there was a place that you would go to, it's probably your bed. Your bed is probably your safest place because if you don't feel well or you're not doing very good that day, a lot of times you just go to your bed. It's your safe place. Um, and if somebody came in your place that night and their intent was to do you harm, and you're in bed, that there's nowhere you're going to go. That's your last line of defense. And so if somebody comes into you, no matter what kind of weapon they have or whatever, and they come to give you and do harm to you, there are no rules whatsoever to what you can do to get through that whatsoever. You could grab whatever you want. You can shove, you can gouge, you are fighting for your life at your last line of defense. There's no place to go. Now, if you're a trained soldier and you're in another country, you have rules of engagement. You can't do certain things. If you went outside those lines, then you're going to find yourself in front of a court and they're going to be, talking to you about what you can or cannot do, and they might even put you in jail for it. But if you're in your bed and somebody invades you, there is no rules for that. So let's use that as the example real quick in this big picture. If you are a Wampanoag and you've got people invading your house, your places, where you've lived, where you've grown up, and they are not just the nicest people, they are coming to take land from you. And like we established before, you don't know what land ownership is, but the people of the Puritans know that land ownership is very much something that they want. So they come in and start taking your land up. And so you start fighting for it. You want to fight no matter what. Well, lots of times and throughout history, people did atrocities to the dead bodies to warn off the white settlers. And one great example of this is Vlad the Impaler. Vladimir III is a prince of Bulgaria, and he is what we know today as Count Dracula, which is actually the word dragon in their language. So he's the Count of Dragon. And so he was known as Vlad the Impaler. And the reason what is impalement is basically you get this huge pole, wooden pole, and you sharpen one side of it really sharp, and then to punish somebody, you basically take it and shove it between their legs up into their rib cage, and then you stick the pole in the ground, and you stick it outside the city. And so as you walk into the city, there's like all these dead people on poles. And the purpose of that is to tell people and to warn people, do not commit a crime in this town or you're going to end up like that. And this is very common throughout all of history. They did atrocities to people, they'd left them outside, and so if you're coming into town and you see all this stuff, basically there's all these warnings that says, hey, don't do this or you're going to end up like them. And so that's what we're talking about. So these Native Americans did atrocities to him to see, hey, don't come mess with us. And so this is where you're going to get this idea that Native Americans are not just savages, uncorrupt, untouched, but they're bloodthirsty savages. And the word savage starts to change over a long period of time. And so you can imagine the people of the Puritans, they send off all their boys to go fight in the war, and they come home and their boys are just mutilated. And the people are like, "Oh my gosh, did you see what happened to Johnny? And Johnny's all blah 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 blah." Oh my gosh, those people are bloodthirsty savages. Oh my gosh, they're non-human. That even to the point that it's in the newspapers, it's word of mouth from one town to the next that pastors start to say it's the duty of good Christians to exterminate these savages, these bloodthirsty savages. And so the word savage starts to change over this long period of time based upon this King Philip's War and the Wampanoag tribe. And so not only are you going to be craving oatmeal, this is William Penn and his Quakers, and they're a pacifist people. And pacifists don't believe in war. They don't hold guns or swords or knives unless it's for a tool. They don't kill people. And so they come in and they actually start renting the land from the Native Americans. And over a long period of time, even the most pacifist, gentle people change their ideals. And they start basically offering money for scalps. And we'll talk about scalps in here in a second, but 100 to 150 bucks for a male scalp to 60 to 90 for a female scalp. Can you imagine the 1600s what that kind of money is? That's like offering someone like 5 to 15,000, or like the Congress or the state legislature that offered $25,000 for capturing Bigfoot. That's exactly what we're talking about here. That's what kind of money we're talking about here. So what is a scalp? A scalp is actually taking, when you fight someone to the point that they're either going to die or they're dead, you take your blade, you stick it right on the front of their forehead or somewhere within it, you grab their hair, you pull on it, and then you take that blade and you just start to peel back the skin. And the point of that is it's a trophy that you've defeated them, you've gotten them, they're dead. And so when you come in with that scalp, it's proof that you killed them. And so when you ask the question, who are the savages again? When we're talking about this, the you know people that's teaching them how to do male scalps. Now, what is technically scalping? Where does it come from? Well, the Scythians in northern Greece started doing this a long time ago, in the belief that if they scalped somebody, that their soul would exit out the top of their head and be lost forever on earth. They wouldn't be able to go to heaven or the afterlife or whatever that they would say. And so they started doing this over and over again. And it's a practice that got passed along to everybody from the Huns to, the Romans to lots of people started doing stuff like this. And so when we really get down to it, who actually introduced the Native Americans to scalping? It was the white man that did it. It was the white man that introduced scalping to Indians. And so you can see Robert McGee over there. He's been scalped, and He got scalped by Chief Little Turtle, and I'm sure the rest of his life he was probably a brunt of everybody's joke because he probably wanted a tougher name of a chief to scalp him, like Savage Hawk or you know Blood Bear or something like that, not Little Turtle. That's what scalping is. It's a prize. You killed somebody. So when we talk about what savages are and where that comes from and where the name savage has changed over a long period of time, we can see now that from the east coast on into the west, people started running into these natives. Natives started fighting for their land. As they fought, there's tons of battles. I mean, you can open a regular history book and you're not going to read it all the Native American battles that you had. There's tons of them. All these conflicts, these areas that people would go in and they would build a civilization. The natives like we don't want you here, and so that's where you're going to get into a lot of this. So we're going to jump in their culture because these two cultures are not the same. They're not anywhere close to the same. And so in a roundabout way, when we say that they're civilized, they're more like the white man. They're just as educated, just as smart, just as anything else. The problem is that society states that they have to have like metallurgy or the wheel or they need to know how to do this, and that's what makes them educated. And I could get into like math and science and not history and whatever, but it's what society says is educational or what is civilized. So we're going to talk about what their culture is, and it's a little bit different than what you would imagine. We're going to talk about the five civilized tribes, which are the Choctaw and Chickasaws, which are actually close cousin to each other. Their languages are very similar. The Cherokee, they're one of the biggest tribes. They're not the biggest. The Creeks are the biggest. But we'll talk about Cherokee on their own. The Creeks are the biggest of all the five civilized tribes. In fact, they should have been bigger, but one of their factions was so big that when they went down into Florida to get away from the United States government, they actually claimed them as their own tribe, the Seminole, which is actually the Oconee tribe of the Oconee faction of the Creek Nation. So you can see where they're all at and why they're close to each other and the lands that they had. Now, their religion is very similar. It's very animistic, very harmonized, and how the things that be around the earth always intermingle and how they're harmonized with everything. So they had everything has a role, from the human plant to the bird, the spiritual being. Everything's in harmony, and so as long as everything's in good, that's what I guess you could say perfect worship was a daily day, a daily thing where you have like everything's perfect, and that's what they want. Colors, numbers, directions all had a significant thing to it. And so, if a disaster struck, like a tornado came through, or a massive thunderstorm or earthquake, the gods were upset, and so that was not good. Everything was out of order. They needed to do something that would stop that or please the gods. And it's a very dualistic religion where you have an upper world where the gods live, you've got an underworld where the monsters and the witches live, and then you live in the middle, and the two are pulling against you. And one day you'll learn what dualism is, but that's what is a dualistic religion. And so their gods are like sun, moon, thunder, corn. I know those sound funny, but corn's a life giver. Thunder is power. So you can kind of look at that stuff and think, okay, you get it. You'll understand it. So let's talk about their most famous and most powerful celebration. It's called the Green Corn Ceremony, and it happens right before the corn becomes ripe, and they call it busk. And what they would do is they have these berries, and they call it this black drink. It's called black drink. I don't know what the name of it is or what the berries are used, but they would basically drink this black drink, and this black drink would make their stomach all upset, and they would throw up all the stuff. And the purpose of this is because it's making their body cleansed of all of their impurities. So then once you cleanse out all the impurities, Then you dance and feast the rest of the night. And so basically, you drink all this nasty black drink, you throw it up, and then all of a sudden, boom, you're cleansed, and you can have dancing and feasting all night. So that's what the green corn ceremony is. I don't suggest you do it. And if you look in the background of this, I'm not really like this picture all the way, but if you look in the background, there are two guys that are throwing up. You can see the stuff coming out of their mouth and hitting the ground. And that's the green corn ceremony. Now, their social organization is based upon clans, and we're going to talk about a lot of this. And I wish I could had more time to get involved in this, because this is kind of really cool understanding their social organization. Because from our standpoint, our social organization is totally opposite of what their social organization is. You are born into a clan, and that's the member of your clan the rest of your life. And so, if you're born into the deer clan, you will never leave that deer clan, and whatever that responsibility of the deer clan is what you're going to do. And so these are the different clans of the Cherokees. Chiefdoms are based upon generosity and kindness. So if the chief of the tribe or a peace chief or a war chief or something like that dies, they don't look on bravery and how tough you are or something like that. They look on generosity and kindness. And so how generous and how kind these people are is how they determine who the chief is. And if you watch a lot of movies and you watch and you read about this, that just blows your mind, because all of a sudden it's like, whoa, whoa, it's not about bravery. Like, it's where we watch the movie Brave, or we watch, they're called Braves. No, it's based on generosity and kindness. And so chiefs push the harmony with nature and each other. And so chiefs are big, and in the big picture of harmony and how the religion and everything's perfect. Um, their daily chores and responsibilities are shared. They don't have chores that are per se like women's work or men's work. It's everybody's work. And if you really get down to it, they kind of did, because women would stick around the camp, and they would do everything around the camp, and the men would go out and do stuff. And so the men would go out and hunt, the girls would do the farming and everything around them. But here's the difference: women knew how to hunt, men knew how to farm and take care of the stuff at home. It just wasn't something that they had the chore to do. It was like their responsibility. It's just what they did. So there's no such thing as like women's work or man's work. Now here's the fun part for you guys, because it really is going to make you a lot of you guys upset, is that they didn't marry. They didn't marry for love. They married out of trade. So if a young man was walking through a camp and he saw a girl that he liked, he would find her mother's sister, so her aunt, in other words, and he would go to her and arrange a trade. And the going rate for most marriages was two horses. And why is it two horses? Well, horses are a sign of influence. Like, you can have wealth. It's really hard to get a horse, and you're not going to give up your horse. That means you have to come up with two different horses outside of your one horse to be able to get rid of them so that you can have a wife. So it's a big deal. It really is. They would trade the two horses and get the wife, and then basically the chief would come up, and there's like this beaded band of wampum that they would have, and they would wrap it around their hands, and then basically the chief would say, "You're married. Go and make kids." And so that's what they did. That's how you got married back then. There's no big ceremony. There's nothing other than that. Men could have multiple wives, and every freshman loves this, because all the boys are like, "Oh my God, I'm gonna get tons of horses," and I'm like, "Yeah, you're never gonna get one horse, dude." But if you had multiple wives, it means that you had wealth. That means that you knew how to get horses. That knew how to take care of it, and it wasn't just for the the sake of having multiple wives. It had to have a purpose for the tribe. And that's one of the things that I think a lot of kids don't recognize, is the purpose for the tribe. And their relations were very open. Um, they didn't have to deal with stuff with privacy. You probably walked around and like, oops, the Joneses are getting at it, or something like that, and they didn't worry about the privacy like they did in Europe. The average age of marriage was around 11 to 13 years old, and why so young? Because you're only going to live to be about 30 to 40 years old. So basically, your youth is basically you're about 10 to 18 years old, and your middle age is 20 to 25. And so the purpose of getting married was to have kids because it's important to have for the survival of the tribe. It's not for love. It's not you're going to sit around and go, well, I'm going to establish a career first, and then I'm going to have 2 or 3 kids when I'm 25. No, 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 no. You had people get married so that they can start having kids as instantly as they get married because you don't guarantee that every one of your children are going to live past a certain age. You get sick, there's nothing you can do about it. If a child is born in a weird way or whatever, there's nothing you can do about it. So there's probably a good chance each girl that gets married will have anywhere from 5 to 8 kids, and of those, no telling how many of those are actually going to live through a full life. So you actually had to have this, to do this. Now, their lineage is based upon their mother. It's called a matrilineal society. Now, the majority of people that you probably know in your society has a patrilineal society based upon your father. So your last name is your father's last name. And now, not in all cases, but the majority of the people have their father's last name. So when you are born into a clan, you are basically of that clan, the same clan as your mother. You will never be in the same clan as your father. And so once you are born into certain clans, then basically you are going to be a part of that clan the rest of your life. And when you have kids, unless if you're a female and you have kids, they're going to be part of that same clan. If you're a male, they'll be a part of the clan that you marry, your wife will marry, or you and your wife, sorry, whatever. So you're never going to be, if you're a dad, you're never going to be in the same clan as your kids. And if you're a kid, you're never going to be in the same clan as your dad. They're always different. And that's kind of weird, but basically you couldn't marry inside a clan. Like I said that, and there you go. It's very similar to the last name. You would marry into the same. You'd be born in the same name as your mother, and always be that. And the reason why is because women are the life givers. So a lot of times they give a lot of they feel like the women have a lot of special powers because they were able to give life, and so that's why they do that. Now here's an example of like the Cherokee clans, and I use the Cherokee because I am Cherokee, but the Wild Potato Clan to the Longhairs or Twisters, and you can see what they do there. The Deer Clan, the Blue Holly Clan, the Bird Clan, and the Wolf Clan, and the Paint Clan. And the first word you see on there, Ani Waddle, was just paint. It's paint in Cherokee. So Ani means clan, and then whatever the next word is based upon Gatagui would be basically a wild potato, or Gahili is long hair or a twisted long hair. That's what that is. So when you became an ally, they would treat them like chiefs. So you would sign an ally. And a lot of times Europeans would come over and just sign treaties with Indians for trade and for the fact that if they ever went to war, they would have instant warriors over there that they could fight with. And so this is standing Turkey, and you can see the medallions around his neck are basically from Europe, and his red coat is from Britain. So he had signed a treaty with Britain, and that's why he's got the red coat and all the medallions and stuff that he would have. He's pretty proud of that stuff. But they did it because they would want trade and they would also want troops in case they needed it. Now, Thomas Jefferson is the first man that came up with this idea of hey, let's make them more like us. Let's indoctrinate them into our society, and let's make them more like the white man. And so they started doing that. A lot of southeastern tribes decided to do so. And how they do this? It's called acculturation. Basically, acculturation it's when you move to another culture and you start adopting their ways, and you're becoming acculturized. And so basically, anywhere from your name change to language to all kinds of things. So I know these are kind of newer pictures from what the time frame we're going to be at, but they're becoming acculturized. They cut their hair, they wear the white man's clothes, they probably change their name, and everybody keeps thinking to themselves, well, why is he dark in one picture and light in the other picture? He's not outside, and plus Native Americans actually put oils and stuff on them to make themselves look darker. And of course, he's not using those anymore. So Indian acculturation, they adopted white man's names, like this is William McIntosh, and you can just look at his outfit. He's very much acculturized. The way his coats, to his ascot, to a lot of things that he has on him that gives him the look of a white man. They adopted slavery. This shocks a lot of people because they were like, whoa, they adopted slavery? Yeah, they did. They adopted Christianity. They adopted written languages. They adopted the white man's education system. They did all kinds of stuff that were just like the white man. And let's look at the Cherokees real quick. They had their own capital, which is New Echota, which is out in northern Georgia, just north of Rome, Georgia. They had a written language by Sequoia called the syllabary, which each little word that they had or symbol that they had with their language became a symbol, and so they could put them together. It was said that Sequoia could teach you how to read and write in Cherokee in less than a week. Written constitution. They had their own newspapers and books. This is the Cherokee Phoenix, where it's written in Cherokee and in English. And then they had their own justice system. They had their own laws, and they had their own courts and everything with that. Let me introduce you to some Cherokee real quick. That actually stands, the first three letters is Chalagi, which is Cherokee, and then syllabary. And so if you want to say hello, you'd walk in and say Osio. And then basically someone might go Dohisu, which, how are you? Osio Dohisu. And then you can say Ozda, I'm fine. Nohina, and you? And then if you basically would stick your hand up to your chin and push your hand forward and say Wado, thank you. So there's little simple, words for you. Or if you want to get real technical, Una listi nisaedya, which is happy birthday. Or Gavgeyu, I love you. Or Donagahoi, which basically means, in a roundabout way, it means goodbye. But actually, to the Native Americans, they don't actually have a word goodbye. Every word that they say goodbye actually has a meaning of like, until I see you again. So there's just some quick Cherokee. I wish I could show you more, but there you go. Cherokees did this better than anybody else. They are by far the most acculturized. They built huge plantations over northern Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, even some in the Alabama area. They had huge slave populations. Some of these guys had in the hundreds of slaves. And so they built these massive homes and all over northern Georgia. And this house right here on the bottom right, you're going to see in the video, it's the Van home. This is Major Ridge's home in Rome, Georgia. And this is actually John Ross's home, which was built near Tahlequah.
As dreams of cotton wealth drove prospective planters deep into the interior South, other tribes were giving up huge swaths of neighboring lands. The 14,000 Cherokees found themselves surrounded on every side by American settlers. Scores of whites began to scrabble onto Cherokee farmland. A small group of Cherokees had already taken America up on its offer of new land west of the Mississippi, in Arkansas Territory. But the Cherokee National Council, to a man, was still confident it had the strength to stand its ground. Major Ridge, for one, had much to defend. Nearly 10 million acres owned in common by the tribe, and his own plantation. According to the U.S. Superintendent of Indian Affairs, Ridge's farm was in a higher state of cultivation, and his buildings better than those of any other person in that region, the whites not accepted. In 20 years, Ridge had cleared nearly 300 acres for cash crops, cotton, tobacco, wheat, and indigo. He oversaw his own orchard, dairy, and vineyard, and as many as 30 slaves.
John Ross owned slaves, and John Ridge, when he got married, Major Ridge gave him like 20 slaves, and so he was a slave owner also.
About 8% of Cherokees owned slaves. They were mainly the mixed blood elite. But more and more, that mixed blood elite is adopting the lifestyle of the Southern planter culture.
So well with tobacco in the past that we're thinking of adding to that, or perhaps even some cattle.
How are you, Gaf?
Well, since not square that gone here, so go long. That's can use doggy go near now. I jail you with something. I say no, that's the den down the quay skirt.
My father says the rains were heavy here and the cotton was planted late, but cotton prices are rising again.
Who young ass on? Who go this the heck we skirt? They just
My father apologizes to you, ma'am. He says the cost of your fine dresses is going up.
Huh, a jailer.
Oh, so the man speaking Cherokee is Wes Studi, a famous Cherokee actor from No Fire Hollow, Oklahoma. And so you get to hear him speak some nice Cherokee there. When westward expansion takes place, U.S. populations along the coast started pushing inland, which created wars with natives. A great example is like a Cherokee chief by the name of Dragging Canoe revolted against the whites in the Battle of the Bluffs in 1790. There's many of these that took place. The French Indian War and the War of 1812, it would bring more natives to fight against the whites than anything else. So as history goes on, things start happening. Many of these natives would still rise up and fight against westward expansion because they've been fighting against the whites. It only created more of a problem because they had guns now and they had ways to fight them. And so the more and more of these things happen, would do this. Shawnee Chief Tecumseh would be one of those chiefs that would rise up constantly against whites. He brought so many natives into British forts that they gave him the rank of general, and he's the only Native American to ever reach the rank of brigadier general. One of the things that happens during the War of 1812, in 1815, they had a massive war battle down in New Orleans, and a bunch of Indians went down there and started fighting, and they were trying to figure out where they came from. Well, Tecumseh had reached a faction of the Creeks known as Red Sticks. And so Andrew Jackson and a bunch of other tribes got together and went and defeated the Red Sticks at a battle in Alabama known as the Horseshoe Bend. And so the Red Sticks basically, this war, the Red Sticks were used as a, hey, everybody, we're always fighting the Indians. So whether the Indians were good or bad, they were seen as just like the Red Sticks. So the Red Sticks were the bad guys for everybody. It's almost like if you had a classroom where everybody was acting nice, and all of a sudden one kid's acting up, and the teacher comes back and punches everybody. So the tribes that fought next to Jackson were no different than the ones that fought against them. So the Battle of Horseshoe Bend and the Red Sticks, they carried these red sticks that they thought were magical, and that's where the name came from. Manawa is their leader. And so it caused a huge uproar amongst the southeastern Indians. It created the Creek War. There was like 2 or 3 Creek Wars. It created the Seminole Wars. All of this stuff would basically push for Andrew Jackson to become the biggest culprit of Indian removal. So when Andrew Jackson becomes president, he has this idea that, well, I'm just going to remove the Indians. I don't know why I put fun fact, but just ignore that. So as we kind of end this, realize this. The conflicts amongst the natives created a stereotype that would make them bloodthirsty savages in everybody's eye. This generated a hatred for both sides for each other over the years. The United States government believed that the best way was to assimilate these natives into their own society, and somehow natives accepted this, but did not and refused. If they did not, they refused with the fight. The clash of cultures was prevalent, and something needed to be done. So the United States government is going to push for land swaps and removal of tribes to the, in the